Hello. Well, all our guests on the series so far have had their lives altered in some profound way by their particular revelation. But for none of them has the change been quite so dramatic as it has been for our guest tonight. As a pop superstar on both sides of the Atlantic, Cat Stevens enjoyed a lifestyle envied by millions. He first made it in 1966, when his song I Love My Dog went into the charts. But the success of that, and his next even bigger hit, Matthew and Son, was cut short, when in 1968 he was struck down by tuberculosis. After a year's convalescence, he came back with a string of new and very different hit songs. Well, that song, and a number of others that followed, signalled to those who were interested that Cat Stevens was a man in search of something spiritual. By the mid-70s, having flirted with astrology and Buddhism, he found it. He announced he was giving up his singing career to become a Muslim. To prove it, he changed his name to Yusuf Islam. Now, what to many pop stars would merely be a flash in the pan, to Yusuf Islam has been an enduring truth. For the past 7 years, he's devoted much of his life to the study of the Quran and Islam, and he spends a lot of time working with a school and Islamic study centre in London. Yusuf Islam, it's become rather a cliché of the gossip columns that the glamour and the razzmatazz of the pop superstar's life is actually hell if you're living it. Is that the way you found it?
Well, music, the music business is, yes, it's connected quite a lot with hell, I should think, but I wouldn't say it's all like that, though. Of course, there is a good side to it, providing you can see it for what it is.
As a child, at least one member of your family was Greek Orthodox. Were you drawn to any particular religion?
Of course, I received basic Christian upbringing. I didn't really question that because, of course, you take it for granted that your parents know better than you. But anyway, as I grew up in that atmosphere, there did seem to be a sort of a dichotomy or separation between what seemed to be the spiritual ideal, you know, and the actual material life, the goings-on around me. So I suppose because of the attraction of the life of the world, and because the religious life seemed kind of difficult and not quite for me, so I went naturally into the life of the world. I was brought up in the West End of London, so I think that had something to do with me going into show business.
But in those years, in the late 60s, it seemed that scarcely a week went by without some pop star or other heading for the hills in India or Nepal to sit at the feet of a guru. Were you ever tempted to take that path?
Yes, in fact, that was part of my journey, I would say, that, you know, during that time, I think I'd just had a sort of brief career in the beginning with my early songs and things. And then I'd contracted tuberculosis. That was around, let me see, 1969, something like that, 1968, 69. That made me think more seriously about life. I started studying meditation. In a way, I'd lost my faith in Christianity, I suppose, because I felt that it was too linked with the system, you know, and we wanted to break away from the system. I believed in God, but not through any particular dogma or, you know, doctrine.
Could I just ask you before you go on, what do you mean linked with the system when you were talking about Christianity?
Well, it seemed to me that the Christian faith was, so there was a kind of a hierarchy, you know, built in with it. And I think I wanted something more natural. perhaps more spiritual. I didn't find it in the church.
When you were struck down with TB, and it took you a year's convalescence to get over that, did you at any time feel that this was a sort of divine retribution for your evil life? I mean, the headlines about Cat Stevens up until then had been Cat Stevens, the man with the fast ladies and fast cars. Did you feel that God was somehow telling you something when you laid you down with TB?
Not really. I think it was more of a natural consequence. I thought that it was nature working its way out. But of course, there was also the other thought that I have to actually somehow find out what this nature is and what it wants from me. And of course, as I said, I still believed deeply in God, but I didn't know exactly how to connect or what exactly God wanted from me.
And during this time of spiritual quest, you tried a number of things, didn't you? I mean, you didn't immediately come to Islam. You tried a number of things on the way, as it were.
Yes, as I say, I tried meditation. I mean, I was a vegetarian. I believed, of course, along with many of my generation, in peace, love. But the practical way of achieving that, I had no idea. I'd also become interested in Zen, also in astrology. At one time I was, also looking at the stars for guidance. You go through all these phases. Ultimately, I wasn't sure. I didn't think there was any particular religion which seemed to have the universal answer, the meaning that would be for me and for everyone else at the same time. I didn't think there was such a faith. I thought perhaps I'd have to make up my own religion, if you like.
Well, can you tell us how your revelation, your conversion to Islam, the moment that you knew that Islam was the way forward for you, how did that happen?
Well, it was rather late. I was about 27 at that time. And I'd tried, as I said, all these other ways. I'd been searching, but without finding actually the peace that I was looking for. Then I was given a copy of the Quran. And that's really how I began to embrace Islam. It was in fact a gift from my elder brother, David. And when I started to read the Quran, it struck me that this was like no other book I'd ever come across. The words seemed to be so straightforward and speaking with such authority. It didn't seem as if any human being had written this book.
Was there one sentence in the Quran that unlocked the secret for you?
Well, I think if you take the Quran as a whole, it couldn't just have happened like that with one sentence, but it was a gradual awakening to the fact that there was nothing wrong with this book. I mean, the more I read it, the more I realized there was no contradiction, whereas all other books I knew had to have something wrong with them. They were written by a human being, they had to. But there was something about this book that didn't show any signs of imperfection. And the most striking thing, I would say, the thing that grasped me the most, was the testimony in the Quran, the constant testimony to the fact that there is only one God. And that, to me, gave me the message I was looking for, because up until that point, I thought that religion is a personal business, something which, well, you choose that way, I'll choose this way. I personally think I'm right, but in fact, this was something which I felt had to be accepted by everyone, because everyone by nature believes in some higher power, some controlling force. Many names are given, but essentially it comes down to this, that there has to be only one for all, and that naturally led to changing my whole view of life. For instance, it naturally brings you to understand that people are equal, because we're all created by the same God, and that we're all servants of the same Lord. So that gives you a kind of a feeling that there is unity, purpose, bond between human beings. And that's what I found was the most impressive aspect of the Quran.
When you began to read the Quran, did you find there were certain passages which you took to be signposts on this path you were following?
Yes, I think if I can read you a very small chapter first. This is in fact called the chapter of unity, and it's said to be equal to 1/3 of the Quran, because again the subject is unity. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Translation of that: in the name of God, the gracious, most merciful. Say, He is Allah, the One. Allah, the sole Lord of all. He neither bears children, nor was He ever born. And like Him, there is no one. I think this gives you the effect to understand that oneness of God means oneness of purpose for us and for the universe.
So when you came into contact with this oneness of purpose, having read and accepted the Quran, did you feel that you just had to cut yourself off from the life you had led before? I mean, could you have carried on singing, for example, or did you have to put that behind you?
Well, you see, it wasn't necessary for me to cut myself off as such. And in fact I didn't, because I kept on making music, I kept on singing, I was on the road, but yet I was still a Muslim. What happened was, I think, when I finally did embrace Islam, officially, if you like, unquote, then I had to begin to do certain things. One of them is, of course, most important, is the prayer, is that you pray 5 times a day. And this, in a way, had an incredible effect on my life, because your relationship with God, the closeness that you feel, has to begin with prayer. How else do we communicate with God? So that starts to develop your God consciousness. After that, you find that, of course, you can't do the same things you used to do, because you know that God has made it clear for you that this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. So you start to make a way in your life, and you start to go away from those things which are dangerous. For instance, singing on stage. It's obvious that music isn't forbidden as such in Islam, but showing off is, because again it contradicts your belief that there is only one to be worshipped. So therefore, any idea that would lead to some kind of human worship or idolization is bad. Therefore, being on a stage, having spotlights, even this situation is slightly more innocent, but you've got to be very careful. So I withdrew from public performances, and I just continued to make records. But again, after a while, I lost my interest in music as well. to a large degree. So I was more interested in, you know, studying Islam, and that's what I did.
It's a very formal code, isn't it? A very strict code in the Quran. Do you find it shackles you in a way? It lays down so clearly how you must lead your life. It does seem to cut out a lot of human free will.
Well, actually, I would say it's the opposite, because what I would say is people that go around, number one, saying that they're free, they've got free will. Well, yes, we do have free will, to a certain extent. And yes, they are free to go on making mistakes. But if you choose to follow God's way, this is your choice. Doesn't mean that you're giving up your free will. It means that you're submitting your will to God's will. And that really, I think, is something to do with controlling yourself as well. This helps you to know where you're going. Otherwise, you know that so many people are lost because they're all completely free. They've got no rules. But another thing, I would say that it's not so much, let's say, it's a restricted way of life. Actually, the basic rule in Islam, which I don't think many people know, is that everything is allowed except those things which are forbidden. And that's a completely different way of looking at it, and that is in fact the way it is in Islam. For instance, if you're talking about food, all food is permitted except for, we say, pork or dead meat which has died by itself naturally, and so on. So if you look at it, it's the other way around. We're free to do anything so long as it doesn't go against some of the commandments that we know.
How did your colleagues, I mean people you were working with, people in the music business at the time, react when you embraced Islam as passionately as you have? I mean, did you find that they were sceptical, that they said, oh, here's another pop star, you know, who's found his instant karma?
I think a lot of my friends in the beginning, you see, as I was studying the Quran before my acceptance, I was withdrawing from the social circuit, if you like, because anyway, I didn't like the social circuit. I never liked parties. I never liked, you know, receptions. I always had to be rather drunk to, you know, to go on with them. But yes, I was withdrawing, and my friends, I think a lot of them thought I was acting rather strange. You know, here was I carrying this book with me everywhere, and going into my room and reading, but of course you've got to also realize that a lot of my friends have been with me for a long time. They know also my lyrics, my character, and they knew I was searching. Perhaps they did think, oh, this is just a passing phase, you know, this is just something which is he's going through.
If it's 1971, it must be Islam, yes.
Yeah, so, but that of course has been proved wrong, because no one really enters Islam to leave it. There's no wish to go anywhere else.
How many of your friends from those days actually followed you into the world of Islam?
Yes, I mean, I still have very good relations with, you know, my friends from my previous career. And I still have business associates, for instance, accountants and such. But I wouldn't say that they've embraced Islam as I have, but they've come to understand the message of Islam, which I think is very important. I think the first stage, if you're not searching desperately for a way of life, you first of all must look at things in their perspective. And a lot of people, I think, have been misjudging Islam because of the way it's been presented, and usually by, of course, non-Muslims.
Perhaps not misjudging. I think a lot of people are perhaps frightened of the revelation of Islam, because they see in the revelation of Islam the Ayatollah, they see the face of the Ayatollah. And they're terrified of what he's doing, the Ayatollah and his holy war.
Well, as I often say, I mean, if you're going to take this aspect or this view of Islam, you've got to remember that this is one particular event which is happening in history to a certain section of the Muslim community, which would only total, I would say, 4%. And you're judging Islam itself by this view of 4%. It's not really equatable with Islam. Although I don't say everything that Imam Khomeini is doing is absolutely right. I wouldn't say that he's doing so many bad things. I say that you have to look at it in balance to what there was before. The reaction of coming from an oppressive regime such as the Shah has its effect. But then again, I wouldn't agree, as I say, with everything. And for that, we can say that we don't have to, because in Islam you have the word of God, which is for all people. It's not particular to any time or space. So therefore, whatever anyone does in the name of Islam has to be judged by the Quran and by the revelation of God, and that is just, and nobody can dispute that.
And yet people hearing you talk now, and whilst they will undoubtedly be able to see the peace and calmness that you've achieved through Islam, might find it hard to equate the lyrics of peace that you once wrote about on your road, on your quest, and for example, the system of Islamic justice, which is, again, something else which has made headlines in recent months, which seems so brutal. I mean, do you support that sort of level of brutality that we hear about associated with Islamic justice?
What do you mean?
Amputation for thieves, for example.
Well, I'll give you an example about this. If you go to Saudi Arabia, and I've travelled to Saudi Arabia, where there is the Islamic law, you'll very rarely find anyone with only one hand. What you will find, and what I've seen with my own eyes, people leaving, when the time for prayer comes, people leaving their shops wide open, just putting a little sheet on top, going to prayer, coming back, and everything being in its place. People leaving bags in the middle of the street. And this is what, in a way, people are judging. People are saying, oh, it's such a harsh punishment, but what is the effect? What does it do? It actually protects, if you like, the innocent, and it punishes the guilty, whereas what we find in this society is it protects the guilty and it punishes the innocent. And that's the balance that, you know, if we make up laws ourselves, we're bound to make mistakes. But God doesn't make mistakes. When He decrees something, it's good for the majority. But that's the way we have to view it. I think that's very important.
You certainly seem to have embraced the faith more passionately than people who were born Muslims. But does that indicate that you feel you've got a sort of divine mission?
Well, every one of us has a divine mission. Every human being has been created to worship and serve God. And so in a way, I mean, I may be fulfilling my mission a little bit more than someone else, let's say, but in the concept, as we see it in Islam, that all people are servants of God, whether they're obeying or disobeying.
Couldn't you have done more, though? I mean, couldn't you have spread the message more widely if you'd adhered to your faith of Islam, but spread the message using the talents of music and lyric writing and performance of Cat Stevens?
Again, you come to the point of how do you follow Islam? Do you follow it your way, or do you follow it the way that it should be followed? Does a person come to a religion to suit himself, or must he change himself to the religion? And as I believe that Islam is not just a religion concocted, it is actually the nature, the best code of life for any human being, then it means that you must change your way of life to that. in order to achieve what you want. So if there is music in Islam, it'll come after I've learnt what Islam is more than just coming up in the beginning and say, haha, I know what Islam is, this is what it is, everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. There's no benefit in that kind of propagation. People come to Islam only for sincere reasons and not for any other reason.
Yusuf Islam, thank you very much indeed.